Good afternoon, everybody. The term digital freedom, I think, best captures the spirit of the revolution that is currently sweeping through the technology world. This is really the third or fourth wave of innovation that we've seen in the computing revolution. It started back in the 80s with the personal computer, then everything went graphical, then we had the internet, which suddenly opened doors and expanded horizons. And now we have this participation-oriented era where the internet is bringing people together and allowing them to collaborate to create wonderful and amazing things. And a key part of the framework for that collaboration is the principle of sharing and of standing on the shoulders of giants, of being able to reuse, leverage, remix the work of others. And we see that principle coming through in the free software movement in the form of the GPL and other free software licenses, which essentially allow you to take other people's software and remix that, stand on their shoulders, and reach for the stars. And we're starting to see the same thing happen now with content, with free content, open content, which allows you to take the work of others, the creative works of others, and remix that, stand on their shoulders, and create new and innovative works. So I'm very excited now at the idea of a Digital Freedom Exposition which brings together all of these ideas and looks for new opportunities, new initiatives, new breakthrough ideas around this fundamental idea of digital freedom. I'm not surprised that this is happening at UWC, because UWC is one of the institutions globally that has pioneered work in this field, particularly with the involvement of Derek Keats, who I've known for a number of years since we worked together on the Cape IT initiative. I was struck back then that Derek and I had something in common. We were both outsiders to the technology field. He'd studied biology and I'd studied finance, and yet we were both struck by and impassioned at the role that technology had to play in transforming the Western Cape, and also both fascinated by this amazing thing called free software, which back in the mid-1990s was relatively unheard of. That passion led me to start thought and pursue other interests in cryptography and free software. And it's led Derek to pursue his interests in education, in open content and content management, and now digital freedom. So I'm very proud to be introducing Derek. He is a man of vision. His work on Africa, I think, in Africa is particularly important because it is this free digital freedom, platform of digital freedom, which really is the basis upon which I think we can bring together the creative and industrial thinking on the continent to shape something bold and something new. So without further ado, let me introduce to you Mr. Derek Keats. I'm Mark Shuttleworth, and this work is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. What that means is that you have fundamentally all the same rights to this work as I do. We can take it, remix it, re-edit it, reshape it, change it. From the very first day you see this content, you can make this content part of your own body of knowledge. So enjoy it in freedom.
So good morning, everyone. I'm going to try and do something slightly different. I'm not going to use an open office or a presentation. I'm going to use a different kind of software. This is a web-based application. And the reason I'm doing that will become evident in a minute. I started out with the idea of talking about the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources Project, or the AVOIR project. And I decided that I needed to do a little bit more than that. I needed to kind of throw together a potpourri of stories around some of the things that we're doing at UWC in relation to the whole notion of digital freedom, free and open source software, and free and open content. So being a potpourri, it's basically a bunch of dried up things sitting in a bucket, and you're not going to get a good perspective on any of them, but at least I hope that we'll be able to give you some kind of a sense of what we're up to at UWC. I'll start off by trying to set the scene and take you back to 2002, which is not that long ago, when I had been 2 months in the job of Executive Director of Information and Communication Services, which means I'm basically the computer guy on the campus. And one of the things that Council put in my job description was that I should enable UWC to be a competitive organization in the field of education higher education through the innovative application of ICT. So I thought this would be a really exciting thing to do. It was only after I signed on the dotted line that they said, oh, and by the way, we have no money. And so one has to really scratch one's head and think, how does one position an organization to be kind of at the cutting edge of technology and its application without money? And one of the things that I had some familiarity with was free and open source software. I didn't know much about free and open content at that stage. In fact, it was Mark Shuttleworth and his mother that introduced me to that whole concept. But I started thinking about what's the best way to eliminate barriers to innovation in an organization that's got a particular kind of history, but also has financial limitations and other limitations. One other piece to set the scene is I try to work within a kind of triangle of things where we have policies and strategies linked to projects. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy side of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects, but I'm not going to go into any detail in any of those. Another important piece of this back then, and even now to a degree, is that if you look at the penetration or acceptance of free and open source software or free and open content in an organization and the benefit to that organization, you're going to find some kind of a relationship like this, where when you start out, the increments that you make in terms of the penetration doesn't necessarily give the organization large and obvious benefit. So when you're starting out here, one of the problems that you face in bringing about organizational change is that people tend to see only that flat part of the curve. And so to convince people that there is a path to go from here over to here is also a challenge in and of itself. And a lot of the studies that are done around TCO and so on, for example, look at the slope of the curve over here. They don't see the big picture. They don't look at the ecosystem. They don't look at what it takes to build up a culture of free and openness within an organization and how the benefit happens over time. And so the vision is kind of limited. Somebody's talking with another microphone on, I think. Another piece of the picture that I think is important, if you look at the bottom of this diagram, it's basically an organization as a consumer of software, and at the top is an organization as a producer of software. And there are different ways in which an organization can participate in free and open source software. But most people coming from the proprietary world tend to lie in this end of it, where the mindset is one of using existing software rather than participating in an ecosystem that involves both use and creation of software. And so one can, for example, use software as it is, or one can build software from scratch. And very seldom does one, when you really have a strong free and open source software ecosystem, actually live at either end of those. The really interesting bits are in between. You know, we haven't built an operating system. We haven't built Office packages. So we didn't build a database. And even in the application that I'm running here, which is our own free and open source software application, we didn't build the entire application. We're using libraries. We're using an underlying database. We're using an operating system. We're using the Apache web server, and so on. So we don't build everything from scratch, and we seldom do in free and open source software projects. But often that's the mindset of people. You either use something or you build it from scratch. So there's a lot of work to do to break down those misunderstandings that we have. So how do we build our own capacity with no money and limited institutional understanding, given this picture that I've just presented of free and open source software and their benefits? Well, one of the ways that we started out with in doing this was to create a kind of a business unit almost within ICS, which we call the Free Software Innovation Unit. And the Free Software Innovation Unit, its job then is to look for opportunities to do projects with free and open source software. And one of those first projects that we engaged with was one that we call the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources. And it's interesting that one of the speakers, Rishab, I think it was, this morning showed the slide of the distribution of Debian committers or Debian project leaders around the world, and it kind of matches the lights, as he said. Well, you can use that as a proxy for all kinds of things, including capacity for software engineering. So what we're trying to do with the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources is cast a bigger net, change the scale at which we're looking, and look at the level of Africa as a whole to the extent that we can, and put together a project that basically is creating virtual concentrations and using our own capacity to build more capacity within Africa. So the idea is to build capacity in software engineering. I'm not going to go into the details of that, to also build world-class software and to create an ecosystem that promotes and strengthens innovation through the kinds of transactions that take place in that ecosystem, including the transactions that generate the software that we need in order to run the university. This is where the AVOIR nodes are distributed at the moment. Give you a sense that we are reasonably well represented around the African continent. We don't have necessarily developers in all of these sites. Some of the sites are Nettal Africa sites where we have implementation partners rather than development partners. There are 4 cornerstones of this project. One is collaborating. You've got to build a community if you're going to do this stuff, and the collaboration within that community is very important. And of course, the coding is also important. We also have implementation as one of the cornerstones, and then connecting to the broader ecosystem and looking for other opportunities. So, for example, in the Western Cape, we've implemented some commercial sites using the software. We get paid to do that. We earn some revenue, and that keeps the Free Software Innovation Unit going. The first project was an e-learning project. We called it Cool NextGen. Cool stands for Knowledge Environment for Web Learning. And it was basically, the idea was to try and bring together good ideas from computer science and good ideas from education, have it driven by the users, not by technology, and to take advantage of student projects, to enable student projects to actually contribute to something as opposed to contributing to filling up shelves, which is what most student projects, I think, tend to do. I'm not going to go into the details of all of that because I want to move on and give you another sample of the potpourri of things that are in my bucket. But this is Cool NextGen training happening at Jos University in Nigeria. Picture being worth 1,000 words. This is Megan Watson up in Ghana last year, where she ran a training workshop for developers. This is a really interesting place. This is Uganda Martyrs University, a small university out in the middle of nowhere, where the majority of the students who are participating are in fact women, which is very unusual, I think, in the African context, certainly in the South African context. We've also done some work in the Philippines. So this is the first Philippines Equality Summit, where we ran a week-long workshop in various things, including e-learning and the use of this software made in Africa. This is Kabul University lecturer in Afghanistan giving a presentation on using Cool NextGen, which they've rebranded as ANGEL, which stands for Afghans Next Generation E-Learning. And we have a team going off to Afghanistan, I think, in the next couple of days to take the training to the next level. So we are working from Africa out to other parts of the world. And we have a whole bunch of other products as well, which I'm not going to go into. In 2006, we realized that we'd gone as far as we could go with this application framework, and we decided that we needed to start over again and redesign a framework that was really going to be useful for the foreseeable future, and that was going to enable us to do all this Web 2.0 stuff and make us ready for changes that are happening in education and so on. And my wife, who happens to speak Chichewa as her first language, that's I think there's somebody here from Malawi, that's the language spoken in Malawi. And I asked her, I said, come up with a good name for me. And she came up with the idea of Chisimba, which is the framework, the pole framework to use to build the traditional African house. So it makes a good name for an application framework for building things that arises in Africa. So that's what Chisimba is. It's an object-oriented framework for rapid development of distributed software applications. So in 2006, 2007, we designed a new architecture, incorporated things like services-oriented architecture. We are going to be bringing out an enterprise services bus in about a month or two's time. Make it standards compliant, improve the object orientation, improve code generation. When we're done with the enterprise services bus, you will be able to generate code, generate applications from database metadata. And to make it Web 2.0 enabled and ready for Education 3.0. Education 3.what, you may say? You may say. Bobby Kershaw mentioned this in her talk. And my web browser has just died, or my mouse has just died. Oh, here we go. Philip Smith and I published a paper in First Monday that came out in March, where we talked about some of the changes that are taking place in education and what Education 3.0 means. And to just summarize it quickly, we're really talking about changes that are driven by the users, changes that are driven by the students. As the digital natives, as they're sometimes referred, get into education institutions and begin to see that there are opportunities to take us beyond where we are now, and students begin to make choices where they focus on, not on institutions, but on what it is they want to know. And so the barriers between institutions and disciplines begin to break down, and organizational structures have to change in order to keep up with the demands placed on the organizations by the students. So that's what I mean by Education 3.0. I'm not going to go into the details of that. You can read the paper. The URL is there. Now, the next little piece of stuff in my potpourri is our free content and free/open courseware implementation strategy that we've developed for the University of the Western Cape. And again, following the idea of policy, strategy, and projects, we're implementing this strategy through some projects. Basically, to summarize what the strategy does is it recommends licenses for our educational content. Where no immediate commercial revenue is expected, a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. Where content is expected to be published commercially, a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike non-commercial, but reverting to Attribution Share-alike after a period of time. So it's not locked up in a non-free license forever, or at least until copyright expires. And where derivative works are not appropriate, for example, where the rector makes a political commentary, we recommend a Creative Commons attribution, no derivatives, so that the integrity of the original is preserved. We're not following the approach of the open courseware initiatives. The open courseware initiatives, I think, are a little bit of a scam in that a tremendous amount of donor funding has been tied up in building capacity in impoverished institutions like MIT, and almost none of it going into building capacity anywhere else. The donor agencies spend $68 million. $12 million of it went to non-U.S. institutions, so you can see that most of it was spent in the U.S., mostly to Europe, China, and Africa. In fact, almost nothing came to Africa. Most of it was in Europe and a little bit in China. And where it was spent in Africa, it was spent in the African Virtual University, which has already soaked up billions of dollars or at least hundreds of millions of dollars of World Bank money, and a very well-resourced organization in South Africa. Not one African university has received any benefit of funding from this initiative, and all the content is released under non-free license, and all the content targets lecturers and not students. And what the Open Courseware Initiative has done is it's divided the world not into the first world and the second world, but into the well-fed, high-quality world, or at least the assumption is that the quality is high because it's obviously institutions like MIT. It must be, right, Phil? Yeah. So, and that's part of it. The other part of it is that it makes the assumption, the untested assumption, that the only way to get good quality content for learning in the developing world is to have it developed in the developed world in institutions where the infrastructure that would use it and everything is in place. Most of it is actually not usable in the developing world because we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the means to move it around, and so on. So we've divided the world into the hungry, low-quality world and the well-fed, high-quality world. And much of it is also typical of what's done with internet technologies today in education. We take 21st century technology, 21st century minds, and we throw 19th century pedagogy at it. And this is mostly what results. So we want to try and see, education needs creativity in order for it to happen. But who gets to create? Is it people who are like me standing up here in front of the class, or is it the people, the students sitting out there? So we've created one project that takes this free and open courseware into a different space. We call it the Rip, Mix, and Burn project, and we're very thankful to the Shuttleworth Foundation for a grant that is enabling us to get this project going. It's at the very beginning. We're just beginning it now. The idea is to take reusable educational content, mix it, create derivative work, add your own ideas, sequence it, and then burn it, publish it to a course site, to some place, to YouTube, to MySpace, to our e-learning system, to whatever. And what kind of creativity is valuable? I think in learning, almost any kind of creativity is valuable. So this is a kind of remixed vision. Students collaborating across institutions, nations, cultures, languages, academic disciplines to create their own learning by choosing, sequencing, connecting, and reusing from a global repository to which they contribute and share freely without restriction, not with a horrible non-commercial restriction that MIT uses, under the guidance of an enlightened teacher. We're looking at a new role for institutions, a new role for students, and a new role for learning. And this is, of course, a vision, and we're not there yet, but we have to start somewhere. So our first project is probably to do that which has the least resistance, which is something which we can do quite easily. So we're doing a podcast project where we've given students MP3 players, recorders, so they can record as well as play back. They're being encouraged to, the lecturers are being trained in order to enable them to give student podcast assignments, and also in order to be able to assess those remixed podcast assignments. And all of the content will be available under an attribution share-alike license, so students who come along later can also use that and remix it and build on it. So this stuff is really difficult, right? So I'm going to show you exactly how difficult it is. I'm going to take a podcast, which is a remix of content on Wikipedia. And this was done by my daughter when she was 8 years old, and her cousin that she worked with to put this little program together. That's my daughter and her cousin, and they put together a podcast on Beethoven. And it's kind of childish and simple, but it shows what the technology can allow you to do with pretty much minimal resources. These podcast MP3 players that can record cost about 250 Rand, which is the same price roughly that students pay for a memory stick, and they can double up as a memory stick. So we're not looking at cutting-edge technology here. We're looking at something that is within reach of most students. And I don't have my sound plugged in, so we'll try this again. Okay, I'm going to skip this because it'll just take me a long time. But you get the idea probably anyway, that you take content from Wikipedia, you turn it into something where you can create a dialogue around it. And in order to do that and have the dialogue, you have to be able to understand it and learn from it. And so you create an opportunity for people to learn by simply taking something and remixing it. But that's only the first step. The web has changed in recent years, and a lot of us in education still haven't come to grips with the basic web. But the web has itself become remixable and programmable. So in this picture here, I have a timeline which shows some events in the life of Nelson Mandela linked to a map. And I want to show you this in real time. So here's the timeline. You can drag this timeline back and forth and see what's happened. This is actually a project of a master's student at MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, the timeline. And we just wrapped the code into the Chisemba framework and made it available. So with one line of code, you can generate this sort of thing. And we've also incorporated it into things like the blog module. So if you want to do a timeline of the blogs and things like that, you can generate it automatically. This is the power of the programmable web. And you can put in mashed up content from other places. So this particular item is looking at Nelson Mandela's testimony, and you can see that underneath here, it'll probably take 100 years to load because this is coming over the web. This is not on my laptop. This is mashed up with content on another site. And if it will play, you see it's buffering. You can actually hear the sound of Nelson Mandela speaking at the trial, but I think we're not getting the bandwidth here to actually get the file. But it does give you the idea that you can bring these things together, mashing up content from different places and create learning opportunities that are not just simply regurgitating text, which is most of what we get people to do, is regurgitate text. It is, a little bit like chewing up a textbook and then spitting it out and hoping that it comes back together with all the pages in the right order. Doesn't work like that. You can also then link the content that is in a timeline, for example, to a map. And again, this map is generated with one line. So this is not rocket science here. And so, for example, if we can say what is the significance of Toronto, Canada to Nelson Mandela, and you click on the link, and the link takes you to the map. And if you click on the map, you get a YouTube video of Nelson Mandela launching the Children's Fund in Toronto in 1998. And none of this is on my laptop. All of it is made possible because the web itself is now remixable. And these are the kinds of things that we need to be exploring if we're going to really take education to the next level. So this is a snapshot of a few things that we are doing at UWC in this space. And I'm not going to give you any more examples, but just look at where we are today. I think where UWC has come. Thinking back to here and looking up to here, I suggest that we are probably at the point now where we're beginning to see increasing benefits of building our ecosystem. But we are not seeing those benefits because we're mere consumers of free and open source software. We would see some benefits from doing that. But we're seeing these benefits. We're beginning to see these benefits because we're building our ecosystem. And I think we're getting into the stage now where we're beginning to accelerate in terms of the benefits that we see. The more we do, the more benefit it brings, and the quicker it brings those benefits to us. And this is true not only of software, but it's also true of content and content resources. So thank you very much. And I guess we have some time for questions, do we? Is anybody else freezing in here?
Hi. Hello. I think you mentioned something earlier about capacity, and what strikes me in all of this, I mean, we as South Africans obviously face a lot of issues with regards to bandwidth, as was illustrated by the fact that, you can't really watch the YouTube video unless you wait for 10 minutes. But to me, the biggest problem seems to actually be capacity and not these bandwidth issues.
I would agree with you. I think the bandwidth is a problem. For sure it is a problem, but it's not the number one problem in my mind. Although the bandwidth problem and the capacity problem are intimately tied up with one another, because it's difficult to build capacity if you don't have the bandwidth, and people can't connect to each other, if they can't participate in these online communities, if they can't commit source code, if they can't upload a video file. So they're not totally independent. They're confounded one within the other. But that is certainly true, and that's one of the reasons why we are looking at projects like the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources to try and build capacity. Tomorrow, I'm on a plane to San Francisco, and one of the things I'm doing in San Francisco is I'm having a conversation with the folks at Google, because Google have got the Summer of Code program. But the Summer of Code program is at a very high level. You need confidence in order to participate in that. You need to already have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. And so it's not really a capacity building thing. What I would like Google and other organizations and maybe Sun Microsystems, Juan Ramon, can participate in this as well, to get a project together that is similar to the Google Summer of Code, but that is Africa-wide, that is focused on something, so focused for us on the projects that we're already doing in Africa, and to work on putting together something similar to that, but with developers who are still relative newbies to the development scene, who haven't yet built their capacity, A, for coding, and B, for collaboration. In fact, when we started the AVOIR project, we thought that the collaboration would just come naturally, and we could just help people learn how to code. And in fact, we actually have to help people learn how to collaborate as well. Otherwise, they code, and they work in a closet. It's like working in a closet. They write their little bit of code, and they commit it to CVS, and nobody even knows it's there. And so we also have to build capacity for the entire ecosystem, which is why we define those 4 cornerstones within that, within the AVOIR project. But definitely we have to build capacity. There is a serious shortage of capacity at the moment. Not only just capacity to sit down and write, but the capacity to actually conceptualize things, to actually come up with really stupid things that everybody wants to use. I mean, I don't know if anybody's used MySpace. I discovered MySpace a little while ago by accident. I mean, I knew about it, but didn't pay any attention to it because I thought it's for teenagers, But I went and looked at the stuff that's there, and it's really totally asinine. I mean, there's actually nothing in there, but it's got millions of people using it. And so, we need people to come up with those kinds of ideas, and there's no reason why the next YouTube or the next MySpace or the next Google Video or the next Google Maps couldn't come from Africa. It can. We've got clever minds. We just have to build those clever minds into something that has the capacity to actually be innovative. And there's no better way to do that, I think, than through free and open source software and through creating free and open content that everybody can share and build on. Because there's no barriers. There are no barriers whatsoever. I can buy a second-hand computer for $25 and get involved.
I've got a question about the dynamics in a classroom kind of environment and whether it's worth trying to reproduce that in an online sort of community. Only as a participant, I'm not a lecturer or teacher, but my observation is that in a classroom environment or a course with defined start and an end, you have a kind of unfreezing period, which is kind of like at a party where in the beginning everyone kind of is in a corner, and after a while they start talking to each other. And in a typical classroom environment, after a while when people get to know each other, they're more open, they're more willing to learn from each other and share with each other. Now, I'm not sure whether that can be duplicated in an environment where there isn't a bounded start and end, there isn't a continuity of who's involved and who's not involved. Do you think it's worth having some sort of more structured approach to online course, or do you think that we'll have to find other alternatives to that?
I think both approaches are valid. I think that there's going to be plenty of places and situations under which you need the structured online course. And one of the manifestations of this Chisimba software is, in fact, as an e-learning platform. And you can actually organize a course. You can go through the whole instructional design process and design all of your learning activities, link in your content, hook in your learning activities, drag a discussion forum into a piece of content and create a learning activity around it. You can put a YouTube video inside of a multiple choice quiz, for example, if you want to. So, you can structure in a kind of traditional way using these tools, but you can also deliver things that are unstructured and more open-ended. And I think that what we're going to see happening is over time, what we call Education 1.0, which is what you're describing as the traditional classroom, is being supplemented at the moment with technologies from Web 2.0. So that's what we call Education 2.0. But Education 3.0 will see a lot of these barriers breaking down and a lot more. For example, in the paper I describe a student who in a university in the Philippines does some activity, interacts with people at UWC, gets credit for it from the university in the Philippines. And I think that we're going to see both, and both are valid, depending on the circumstance, and the age and maturity and mindset of the people participating in the educational experience.
My comment. I think that the capacity is actually present in Africa. In the United States, when capacity started to get low, Internet 2 was brought about for educational institutions. Giant in Europe is a project that's providing increased bandwidth to universities in Europe. Here in Africa, I understand that there's a national research and educational initiative that's creating a backbone for educational institutions that's got capacity beyond 2 or 5 gigabits of transport at this point in time. I should see the barrier that you're encountering as a barrier to access through maybe telecom's control of access. Would you care to comment on what steps are being taken to get higher bandwidth from telecom or to remove it as a monopoly?
Lots of people have tried negotiating with telecom, but it's not that easy. The NREN story at the moment is simply piggybacking on the existing pipe, the existing bandwidth that exists. And so far, South Africa is the only one that actually, as far as I know, have that up and running. But it doesn't give us any additional bandwidth whatsoever. It's just a router in London that connects us to a different network. But to get to that router, we're still using the same bandwidth that we use for everything else. So there is an initiative, but it hasn't yet delivered anything that changes the picture that I presented. Of course, there are lots of things happening. We have the second network operator. There's a lot of fiber lying around in Africa that's not being used because of regulations. There's a tremendous potential to use wireless radio technologies. There's a lot of stuff happening, and it's on the horizon, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I'm dealing with the reality that we are in, and I can't afford to wait for the hope that it will get better, because certainly over the past 5 years it has not gotten any better. If anything, it's gotten worse because more people are now on the same amount of bandwidth. And Philip was joking yesterday whether we were using the Pony Express for our internet, but that's our reality. I mean, we paying jumbo jet prices for sailboats, and we've got to get out of that situation, and the only way to get out of it is through removing regulation. And the NRENs will help us to some extent, but it's not the only answer, and it's not here yet, and it's going to take a while. I don't know if that answers your question. It's not just a nurse with his loudspeaker.